Hello, it's Demented Squirrel Crafts. It's Valentines, so based on this vintage Valentine's card from 1910, I'm going to make a group of little creatures. So for this I'm going to use a large egg, 3 small balls, some gardening wire and some extra weights. Because the roses will be top heavy and movable, I decided to add extra weights into the base. So I based using the basing technique I always do, which I have a much longer form video that I will link in the description so you can see in not speeded up details on how I do my basing. So I'm just using this gardening wire, doubling it up, twisting it to make it stronger because I want the roses to be posable when they're finished. Because clay foam, when it dries, stays flexible to a point, you can move things around. Once the internal structure is all completed, I will do my usual basing technique for the clay foam. So it's just a layer of clay foam in the colour that will be a shadow colour or a base colour. Put it on, poke loads of holes in it, and then let it dry. The rose stems I covered in hockey tape, which is fabric-based tape, because the foam adheres better to an absorbent substance. The hockey tape makes it easier than the wire because wire is metal or plastic and it's difficult to adhere to. Covered the rose head in red because we're going to do red roses, poke loads of holes in them, and then leave them to dry. For a more in-depth look at how I do my basing, there's some links in the description. Once the base is completely dry, I'm going to start with the vase, the flower holder, the gift holder. I think it's a vase that's got a square of corrugated cellophane wrapped around it to give it that beautiful shape that looks like 3 petals. So I did this by making a flat layer about a few millimeters thick so that when I use this chopstick and I make my lines, it makes a beautiful texture that's quite formed. And I make that all the way around, and then I'm going to use a metal ruler in order to make some extra texture on top of that. Now a lot of this video is going to be speed running the texture making because there's a lot of it, or there's duplicates of it like for the roses, so I don't want you to watch a 3-hour video of me repeating the same thing each time. I also like videos where I see the whole process. Not just draw 2 circles and then draw the rest of the owl. That makes so many assumptions on the process, what you know before, what you could learn, what's involved, how much time it takes. It's just not a good thing. So these are the edge petals, so it's the same. Flatten out a shape, use the chopstick in order to make the forms, use the ruler in order to make the extra lines, form the leaf shapes in the various forms that you want, and then leave those to dry. And I repeat this for the 3 parts, so that is all, it's going to dry with the vase, so when we do the assembly it's all in a relative form that's equal to it. So again, speed running the process of the other 3 petals. I did some texturing on the inside, but you're not really going to see the inside. I'm also going to do the ribbon, and I'm making it in separate parts because then that's easier for it to dry and it's easier to hold it and manipulate it together rather than trying to do it when it's all soft. So the ribbon is just a sausage, flattened, cut into the various shapes, and then manipulated to look like it's a ribbon, to look like it's fabric. This green color is the regular green with a little bit of blue and some beige, to make it give sort of a vintage look. I know on screen it looks quite emeraldy green, but in real life it's a bit more olivey coloured, so it works really well. I did add a little bit of cornstarch to this clay to give it a bit more stiffness because it was quite soft, so that it would hold its form better, and I didn't have to put an internal structure like craft foam inside it or anything like that. It could just hold its own form and be really good. Now when you dry foam clay, before it's 100% fully dry, it's still quite malleable, so I am going to let this dry for a little while and then do the assembly before it's 100% dry so that I can wrap the ribbon around and make sure that it all works together. So here's all the finished vase pieces, all going to go and dry, and once they're all dry then we'll assemble it. While the vase is drying, I'm going to work on the roses. I decided where I wanted the faces, so I made a flat area there. I used the palm of my hand to give it a little bit of texture, and then I'm going to work on the rose petals. So it's just a flat ball, and I've squashed it out between my hands to make a vague rose petal-like shape, where it's thinner at the top and a bit more wide and frilly as such, a bit more movement to it. Remove excess clay, make another ball, make another petal shape, add the petal to the rose. Now roses work in sets of 3. You overlap a little bit, bring it around, make another ball, flatten it out, overlap that with your first one so that it sort of makes a concentric circle. And then you just continue this until you're happy. And this is quite an organic way of making a flower. It's quite an easy way of making a flower. The clay foam, when it dries, will hold this shape without a problem. Because you've used your hand, it's got a little bit of striation from your fingertips and from manipulating it, so it looks a bit more organic. It doesn't look completely flat. You could use a mold, like a rose petal mold, and use that if you wanted to, but I've not found a rose petal mold that I'm happy with yet, so I just make them by hand. So you just add your roses until you're happy, remove any excess clay that you think is too much, and then repeat the process for the other 2 roses. As I mentioned before, we're speed running through the footage. Because it's a repeat of the first rose, you don't need to see it exactly as it's all done, but I wanted to show how I make the entire piece rather than here's one and now there's 3 finished roses. You leave these to dry completely so that they're easy to handle in the next step. The next step is adding the face. It would also help if I pressed record on the camera for this, for the first 2. I finally caught it for the 3rd one, which I'm glad for. So it's the normal face where we make a little tiny sausage, flatten it into an oval, press it on, and then we add the space for the 2 eyes. I went for sort of goldy shimmer colour for the eyes for this, because I thought it looked really nice actually with the red, rather than like red eyes or white eyes. They're kind of kaleidoscope, but not quite. Making sure to press them into the clay so that they're inset into the clay. That way they don't fall out, they don't need glue because the clay surrounds them. I then made 3 little dots on each side to look like freckles, because that can kind of look cute on the little creatures. So that's the 3 faces done. Normally I would have left them to dry at this point, but I didn't like how empty the rose looked around the face, so I decided to add in some more petals, much smaller petals. So I made the petal shape and then cut it in half with the scissors and then added it in, made it look a bit more full, a bit more involved, so that the faces didn't look like they were stuck on, and this took a bit of fiddling around with it. But sometimes you make these kind of changes last minute in order to make it look better. Once I was happy with the amount of rose leaves that I had added and the way that the roses looked, and fluffed their leaves a little bit so they looked a bit more open, I left the roses to dry for a little bit. The next stage would require me to turn the roses upside down, so I wanted them pretty dry before that point. The next part is just adding in all the details of a rose stem. These are the sepals, so these are the part of the rose that surround a rosebud when it first starts to grow, and then when the rose is fully formed, it's at the bottom, they open up. I really like this part of a rose, so I added this in. I added in little thorns, I added in some leaves, just to make them look a bit more natural and less like a bobblehead on a stick. So once I was happy with how everything looked, I left them to dry completely while I worked on the vase. I'm super happy at how the roses all turned out. Once everything is dry, we just have to assemble the parts together. So I did this with just a little bit of fresh clay and some toothpicks, and you add them in, stab in some toothpicks, add some clay like it's glue. I've forgotten where the camera is again. And now we're going to add the ribbon around the middle and then add in the bow where it's supposed to be to match the illustration. This took a lot of fiddling about and moving and adding in clay so it had the right volume and that it looked right to match what was going on with the illustration, because the ribbon was at a certain angle. But this is why I film everything and then show everything, so you can see what actually goes on to make it look the way it looks at the end. Finally, assembly time. So the easiest way to do this is just to stab a hole into the polystyrene bowl through the foam, add the rose in, repeat for the other 3 roses. I made the leaf, but for some reason I can't find the footage of how I made the leaf, but basically I made it like the roses, where I bent some wire into a shape, covered it with clay foam, made them look like a leaf. I'm now adding the leaf, and then I'm adding some extra fresh clay to hide where the seam joins are between the 2 parts, make it look like moss, and then a little bit of texturing. Once I'm happy, I just leave it to dry. I decided to use chalk pastels, pan pastels, for the highlights rather than painting it, in order to make it look more watercolour and match the illustration in a little more of a vintage way. So I used lime and apple green for the vase, I used emerald green on the leaves and on the parts of the rose, and then I used baby pink and fuchsia pink on the actual roses. I will learn where the camera is, I promise. I really like how the baby pink and the fuchsia on the edges of the petals made the petals look more like roses and more delicate and more, I don't know, fun. I was really impressed with how the pan pastels turned out. To show how flexible foam clay is once it's dried properly, I'm just going to manipulate the stems of the roses. The vase is weighted properly so it's not going to fall over. You can manipulate the stems, you can move them, it's perfect. Foam clay, when dried properly, will stay flexible for years and years. I think I did justice to the vintage Valentine's card. Now it's time for the pretty pictures. If you like what you see and you'd like to see more, please press subscribe. Due to how long I take to edit videos, I do put day-to-day time lapses up on my Patreon. Thanks everyone for the support. I really appreciate it. If you stay to the very end, there is a sneaky of the next video. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful week. Bye.